So obviously, I would hope it's obvious, we're talking about I'm sorry today. We're also going to move forward with this whole rhetorical analysis business. I keep worrying I'm going to spray myself. We're going to actually talk about body paragraphs today. Some of you may be more familiar with this than others, but again, hopefully at the end of the day, we all have, at the very least, a rough idea of how this whole thing is supposed to work. To put that in other words, by the end of class today, it's my hope you will have some idea of what I'm actually asking you to do on the paper. There was some confusion this weekend. And even better, you will have some idea of what it's supposed to look like on the page. I'm going to give you a little bit of a template at some point today. Okay? All right. To begin with, just because it is 9:30 and it is a big old sigh outside, right? We should talk a little bit about what we read, hopefully. So, what are some big takeaways you guys had from the reading for today? Some of the main ideas. There's really only a couple, right? Like big ideas. He talks about them for pages and pages, but there's only a small handful of big ideas. Your hand up? Oh, yes, sir.
Have somebody to ask someone.
Oh, you got to say it with your chest. What?
Have someone to ask someone out on the first date.
How to ask someone. Yeah. What were some of the issues there? There's one big one.
He focuses on how to say hey.
There's that. But it's even before that. It's like the medium, right? Yeah, what's up?
How you doing?
What do you mean by that?
Like my phone.
Do you call or do you text? And understand, this book came out in, 2015, 2016, something like that. But when he's talking about texting, which I know you guys still do, some of you think you don't, but that's what Snapchat is, Facebook Messenger, I know that's what old people do. Anything where you only communicate via text pretty much works just like texting, okay? Same rules apply for the most part. Any messenger app you might use. So there's that. There's the old school, just calling somebody thing. And apparently this is a huge cause of anxiety for a lot of people. My favorite part of this section, I don't know if I can find it. It's at the beginning of, it's on 39 in the hardback, but it's the section calling versus texting, and he has those little subheadings. They're all quotations. So one woman says, a phone call, the worst. Another woman, if you want to talk to me, you're going to have to call me. And then after that, every guy in that focus group, dumbfounded. What are we supposed to do? She says, don't do it. She's like, you have to do it. The hell are we supposed to, right? Is it still that, I'm honestly, because I'm out of the game. Is it still that way a little bit? Like, is that a cause for anxiety at all? Or is that part of the book outdated, do you think?
I guess it all depends on the person.
It always does. Real quick, and it's going to feel like I'm calling you out. I'm not. I see this all the time. For some reason, and I have theories, but I won't bother you with them today. You guys are conditioned to be like, well, you could be this way, you could be this way. That's true, but we're making arguments. Argument is something you have to prove. Can't be, I'll give you a good word. I love this word. I use it all the time, unfortunately. Banal. A banal argument is an argument that's not worth making because we all get it immediately, right? So for instance, I have to teach my sons, we're doing it right now, look both ways before you cross the street because they're 5 and 3. Now, granted, they should not be anywhere near the fucking street, but in the odd event they are, I want them to know to look both ways. And I have to convince them, right? I have to make the kinds of arguments you would make to a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, stuff they can understand on why they should do that. So it's not banal to them. But if no one had ever told you, right, to look both ways, and you're out there on the corner in front of the bookstore, and people just like you were driving around, texting the whole time, which is madness, by the way. I saw a girl go through the red light. I mean, it was green for her, but, she was driving a car that could kill a lot of people, looking at her lap the whole time. Okay. Anyway, if I approached you in this scenario and was like, hey, man, let me give you like a 5-minute breakdown on why you should really look both ways before you'd be like, stop. I'm good. That makes sense, right? It's banal. Not worth proving. We understand it. I bring that all around to say, absolutely, it matters. It's different for each person, right? But we know that. And I stress that because what I don't want to see in your papers is that. Because, and again, I'm pointing at you, that's super aggressive, I apologize. Many of you will try that for some reason. And again, I have theories, I won't bother you with them. But you'll end up in this spot of like, well, you could do this or you could do this. And it's like, I know that, motherfucker. I know choice exists, right? That's not worth convincing me, okay? But we got that. Set it aside. We can ask the question in a different way. Calling versus texting. Which one is better? Which one is preferred? Yeah.
Text.
Texting. Why do you say that?
Well, get an easy way out.
It's an easy way out? What do you mean by that?
It's like, I would rather text. It just, from my point of view.
Sure. I mean, we know that, right? Because you're telling us. But, like, is it easier for you or is it easier for the person you're texting? Or is it both? What?
I can't answer that question.
You could try. Somebody help us out.
I feel like it's easy for you because it's easy for you to think when you type it instead of talking on the spot.
You have more time and space to, and they talk about that, right? One guy he talks to, I think it's a guy, says something like, I have time to like provide a more genuine response, he says, right? Really think out, because sometimes we misspeak, you know, when we're just talking, that happens. But if you especially if you type and you see it, you can go, oh wait, they could read that the other way, I need to, right? Sure. Why else? Why else might texting be easier for you, do you think? Especially in the scenarios he's talking about, like you're asking somebody out, right? Like you're kind of putting yourself out there. Why would it be easier through text, do you think? Yep.
You can take the time.
Yeah. But why else? Is there no other reason? That it's, less anxiety riddled. No? Okay. Yes, sir.
You don't actually have to speak to them. You don't have to have them look at you. You don't have to make eye contact.
You don't have to deal with them as a human being.
Yeah, any sort of social.
It's what?
Yes.
Looking somebody in the eyes, hearing their tone of voice provides more sensory input, right? And that could go really well if they like what you have to say to them. But it could go way worse if they don't like what. Hey, do you want to go out with me? Why are you laughing? Are we on speakerphone? Right? Like, I can hear other people. Who the fuck are you? Right? Like, it presents, it's more fraught, right? Especially, like, kind of what you're talking about too is in person, or God, you guys, some of you FaceTime people, which is crazy to me. My wife has FaceTimed me twice in our lives, and both times, it was an accident, and both times I picked it up thinking it was a phone call, and went, I saw my wife's face, right? I'm not prepared for that. That's too much. So yeah, there is, I think for the most part, most people these days at least, does anybody prefer calling? You do? A couple people? Yeah. I don't, man. And I know you guys are Gen Z and I'm a millennial, so like there's probably some differences between us. My mom called me this weekend, I still hadn't called her back. Text me. If she would text me, we would talk all the time. That's real.
She want to hear your voice.
Sure she does. She's a boomer. This whole texting thing is madness to her. But sometimes she'll, and again, a big part, I didn't answer at the time because I am busy. I have small children. I think I was putting them in bed and they're bananas. But she'll call me, I'll text her and she'll call me back. I'm like, no, I texted you. You're supposed to text me back. That is the agreement. All right. So that's a big question in the first part of the chapter, right? Okay. What's another big idea Ansari brings up. I think there's a really fun section right there in the middle. I think it's fun anyway.
When they was, he was a guy named Darren.
Okay.
He was calling the girl, but he was scared to say what he had to say.
Oh, that's a hypothetical situation he gives. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I had moments like that early in high school. Again, because that was before texting existed. I'm that old, so you had to call people, and I was like, "Hey, do you like red? Yeah, me too. Okay, you know, so, yeah. And I think it's right past that. It's right around where we were talking about the bigger idea of that section, though, because that's like the anxiety we're talking about with calling versus texting. He gives us a couple screenshots, a couple like real. These are not hypotheticals. He gives us what I'm talking about. These are real examples.
When he's talking about how to text people, like what to say.
What did he say? What did you say?
I said when he was talking about like how to text people, like what to say.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, but look, let's get past that. More to the point, it's maybe what not to say, what some people do say when they text people. None of you remember this?
It was the weird message.
Okay, that sounds a little more like what I'm thinking about. Why do you say they're weird?
They were trying to hook up, but it was coming out the wrong way.
Why were they wrong? They seem pretty direct with their messaging, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's wrong? Does anybody know what we're talking about? What's wrong with those messages? My favorite
One of them said,
My favorite is I like your tits.
Yeah.
What's the issue? It's a compliment, right? Nice thing to say, I guess. Yeah, what's up?
They're either not confident or come off too strong.
It was a little strong. Okay, sure.
And like the Darren guy, that hypothetical was just, he was not confident at all.
Yeah. Well, these guys are super confident. He calls them the modern bozo, right? This is the big idea in that section. We get screenshots from a blog called Straight White Boys Texting. Speaking of hey, one of those guys is just hey, like 12 times with no response in between. Yeah. Did you notice the timestamps? Some of those are like a month apart. What is wrong with that guy?
I felt bad because I was like, well, damn, won't you stop right now?
At some point, you got to stop. Yeah, you would think. And again, part of this, so it's doing a couple things. On the one hand, I would hope, for most of us anyway, that stuff's kind of funny, right? To read just what some crazy people have done, right? Kind of nice to laugh at that. On the other hand, it does sort of further highlight some of the issues with calling versus texting, specifically with texting, because that's so much of what we engage in now, right? At least as a society, I think we probably call each other less often. We text each other more often, and that presents positives and negatives. One of the negatives seems to be that you're able to talk to people like that. And he talks about it in this section, and I want to ask, why do you think people talk to each other like that? They say things like, not hello, not how are you doing, but afternoon sex. Like that was another one, right? Another guy just...
Because they don't want to, and some people, like, I guess they don't want to ask for too much, and they don't want to say it the wrong way.
They don't want to ask for too much?
I don't know if I'm saying that right.
Yeah, I don't... What I'm asking is, how are people able... Because, I'll put it to you this way, okay? Because this is ultimately what we're talking about, the difference between calling and texting. I would wager, and I'm pretty sure Ansari says this, I would wager if we did not have texting, there would be a lot less of I like your tits type thing, right? Because you would have to hear someone's voice, hear their reaction, or even worse, you'd have to say that shit in person. You'd have to approach an adult person and be like, I like your tits. How do you think they respond to that? Not very well, usually. right? Statistically, there's somebody out there that like that's what they want to hear. You hope those people find each other. But so again, we're highlighting the difference between calling and texting, and it really hinges on what? Like, what do you miss when you're texting someone versus calling them? You look at them differently, right? How do you look at them differently?
Because you're not actually looking at like an actual person. Like,
What are you looking at?
the text message.
There's words on a screen, right? And we all know there's another person on the end, but again, I think one thing this chapter, but especially this section, really underscores is we take it for granted there's another person on the other side, and when you say it like that, you kind of admit that we're actually not super conscious of that when we're doing it, right? Like if someone were to ask you, you'd be like, well, yeah, obviously, I know there's another, but when you're doing it, I think a lot of the time, it's just words. You're just sending words, they're just sending words back, and it's not, there's a remove there, right? Very quick catch. And that remove, that not thinking about the other person on the other side, maybe allows some people to treat other people like they're not people. You don't talk to them like they're human beings. If you put it that way, I mean, my natural thought is, I mean, do you guys feel like you've ever seen that online anywhere? People engaging with each other like they're not people? You know? The way people talk to each other online? Listen, motherfucker, it's like, would you say that? Just like out in the world? Probably not. So there's something going on here, right? I think Ansari's actually, he's hit upon something in this chapter that's pretty important. It's worth thinking about. Any other major ideas? You guys will probably miss this one, actually. I'll just give it to you. The whole last, 5-6 pages, something like that, is what I call the economics of courtship. It gets a little dry in that section. I imagine some of you, your eyes might have glazed over in those last couple pages of the chapter. Not least of which because you guys will read at like midnight or whatever. But he talks about relationships, forming them, starting them in terms of like supply and demand, right? He talks about reciprocity. He talks about, and again, we have these ideas, but almost like making yourself less available, right? I think some of us are familiar with some of these concepts. But again, when he puts it that way, he kind of asks you to admit, especially because he's using straight up economic terms. Like if anyone in here ends up being like a marketing major or anything like that, you will have classes where you will talk about these things. And he's like, yeah, we do that with the people that we want to get with now. We treat them like products. We make ourselves into products. We sell ourselves. Hopefully somebody buys. Right? I think it's interesting. All right. So those are the big ideas from this chapter. Now I have a selection I want to look at, but before we do that, as promised, I want to give you guys the much hyped template I've been talking about. So we're going to talk about this a lot this semester. Some of you may have heard of this before. Others of you, you may have had teachers that used something similar, but called it something else. This is a rather old but very useful way to think about analysis, at least in an English class. I can't speak to other classes, okay? And the way I was taught, the way I talk about it, it's called the 3 I's, okay? And that's identify, illustrate, and interpret. Now, if you happen to remember these 3 I's, and it helps you with what we're about to talk about, by all means, hang on to that, okay? But what's even more important than these 3 I's is what they pertain to, and that is this. Identify is your topic sentence. If we have time, we're going to talk about that today. If not, we'll get to it next time. But more on that in a moment. Illustrate is your evidence. This is the part of the book. This is what we've been working on for the past couple classes, by the way. Usually a quotation, sometimes a paraphrase, but this is some specific element of the text that you point to and say, look, we need to think about this thing, okay? Interpret, that's where you perform your analysis, okay? This is the section, this is the bulk of your work, where you explain to me, you prove to me that this proves the argument you make here, okay? This is how every body paragraph works. And I stress that because sometimes you guys get confused. This is not how introductions work, okay? Introductions are different. But the bulk of your paper is going to be body paragraphs, so we start with this. Questions at this stage? I assume not, but I thought I'd ask. Cool. All right. So I'm going to leave that up. We're going to talk a little bit about I'm sorry. If you guys could, turn to page 47 if you have the book. If you're using the e-copy, most e-copies have a search function. You can look for the mistakes people make. That should take you to the paragraph we're going to look at. Give you guys a give you a second to do that. All right. Now, I'm going to read these two paragraphs at you, and all I want you thinking about is what we've talked about when it comes to quoting material, okay? What do we quote for? Does anybody remember? What did you say? Yeah. You know what? It'll be more fun then. Let's see what happens. All right. I'm going to read these two paragraphs. I want you focused on if you were to quote something from these two paragraphs, what would it be and why? This will be your first argument of the day. I want you to explain your opinion to me. Okay? Here we go. However, the mistakes people make are not always so egregious. We've repeatedly found that one text can change the whole dynamic of a budding relationship. In a certain context, even just saying something as innocuous as, hey, let's hang out sometime, or spelling errors or punctuation choices can irritate someone. When I spoke with Sherry Turkle about this, she said that texting, unlike an in-person conversation, is not a forgiving medium for mistakes. In a face-to-face conversation, people can read each other's body language, facial expressions, and tones of voice. If you say something wrong, you have cues to sense it, and you have a moment to recover or rephrase before it makes a lasting impact. Even on the phone, you can hear a change in someone's voice or a pause to let you know how they were interpreting what you said. In text, your mistake just sits there marinating on the other person's screen, leaving a lasting record of your ineptitude and bozo-ness. Take a minute with that. Look over it if you need to. If you were going to quote one or two sentences, something like that, right, out of these paragraphs, what would you pull and why? Why do we need to quote this in our paper? We'll give you guys a second. Go for it.
I think the first and last sentence of the last paragraph you just read.
So, second paragraph you say?
Face-to-face and then the last.
Okay, so in a face-to-face conversation, people can read each other's body language, facial expressions, and tones of voice. And then in text, your mistake just sits there marinating on the other person's screen, leaving a lasting record of your ineptitude and bozo-ness. Those? Why?
Well, the first one the first one explains how a conversation is better, and the second one explains how the text can, I guess, damage your relationship with the person, and everything in between is just more specific, and you could leave that out because it would just be too much to put in.
That's true. The second point you made. But why are you quoting those? Can someone put that in other words? What are we getting out of to hear his argument for why we should quote those? Why is he pulling those sentences? What's the big reason why he's pulling those sentences? He likes what about them?
Text isn't always better.
Huh?
Like, text isn't always better.
It presents that idea. I asked this a moment ago, and you guys are working real hard to break my heart today, so I'm going to try to ask again anyway. We do not quote for ideas. That's a nice bonus. If you get a good idea in your quotation, absolutely, that's something to look for, but that's not the primary reason we quote. Why do we quote?
Evidence.
That's what you use it for, but that's not why you quote. Why do you quote? I've literally said this in every class. Maybe even the first class where we talked about the syllabus. And no one wrote it down because I didn't write it on the board. You can take other notes, you know.
The way the author's speaking, his tone.
What?
The way the author's tone, the way he speaks,
What do you mean by that?
like, not the way he puts things out, but the way he explains certain things.
It's not what he says, it's how he says it. Yes. We quote for language. And again, not every bit of interesting language will necessarily have a great idea behind it. All right, so maybe it's not as useful. But if you are only quoting for ideas, you will write me a book report. Okay? And the reason I show you these two paragraphs is because this is a great example of how that works. But actually, Sam?
Sure.
You say sure?
Yes, sir.
I was like, sure, call me whatever you want, Tiffany. We don't even have to look at the first paragraph with the example Sam's given us. Go to that second paragraph. In a face-to-face conversation, this is the first sentence, people can read each other's body language, facial expressions, and tones of voice. Now, I agree that quotation is all about sort of the pros to face-to-face conversation, right? All the good ways that you can get more feedback, you can maybe figure out what somebody meant or what they think of you, right? Before anybody says anything. And the idea is you miss that through text. Okay. What work are we going to do with that in a paper, do you think? What are we going to say about it? Because somebody try. I have a reason for doing this. It won't take long. What are we going to say about that sentence in a paper? Think back to last week before that. I know it's been disjointed because the semester fell weird with MLK this year. We had like a big break real early. But keep in mind what we're trying to do is point to sort of moves Ansari makes, right, in the book, and think about its effect on the reader, its effect on us. So what's he trying to get you to think about is another way we talked about that, right? In that first sentence, what's he trying to get you to think about? How's he trying to get you to feel, maybe? With your chest, please.
Like calling, like face-to-face calls a good thing to do.
Sure. For the reasons he provides. Right? Does anyone disagree with that? Generally, no. Why? Why don't any of us disagree with that? This is an important point, I promise. How's it true?
It's easier to read people in person.
How do you know that?
He just said you get
Because he says so.
Yeah.
The problem is, when you, and again, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's fucking difficult. When you quote a sentence like that, again, has a good idea behind it. I'm agreeing with you. But if that's all it has, 90% of the time you're left with no analysis, no work to be done, because it says exactly what it means. Okay? And when you sit down, let's say the night before the paper's due, I know none of you will do that, some of you will do that, and you pull a sentence like this, you will tear your fucking hair out trying to come up with a body paragraph. for that sentence or a sentence like it. What am I supposed to? Because you can't do anything. All you can do is agree. You'll make the point you made about sort of the implication that something is lost when you text, and then you'll come back around to, well, it's a good point, and then at the very bottom of all of it, you'll find a crazy way to not say, this is exactly what he said. I'm quoting this because I agree. Like, that's all you're going to do. I did that in 2 sentences, right? Body paragraph's going to be rough. So instead, you quote from language. For instance, the last sentence of that second paragraph. In text, your mistake just sits there marinating on the other person's screen, leaving a lasting record of your ineptitude and bozo-ness. When we say quote from language, I promise you, this is a pretty good example of that. There's better, but this is a good one. We don't even have to quote this whole sentence, okay? We can paraphrase a lot of it. We don't need all of it. If you want to, you can quote all of it. But I say it that way because there's more important language in here than other spots. Can anybody try to point us to where that might be? The interesting language, the odd, the unexpected language in this sentence. Unusual. I'm gonna freeze you for a second. You're doing too good. And actually, I'm gonna freeze you too. You're doing too well as well. So somebody besides these two guys. Interesting, unusual. You don't have to know why. I'm not gonna grill you this time. But this is the first hurdle. You gotta get over this hurdle to write this paper. Interesting language. Take all the time you want. We got 40 minutes. We just stare at each other. It'll be super awkward.
You asked what was interesting about the quote.
Interesting language, unusual language. So you're just not super used to hearing it. You know, you wouldn't hear this all the time. The way he speaks, not just what he says, right? That last sentence of that second paragraph.
Leaving a lasting record of your impetude and bozo-ness.
I didn't hear anything you just said, sir.
Leaving a lasting record of your impetude and
Ineptitude and bozo-ness, especially bozo-ness, that's not something.
I don't know what a bozo is.
What is a bozo? I kind of feel like you may not have read, but because he talks about it for like a bunch of pages. What's a bozo?
Another way to find someone else without being rude.
What happened?
I said another way to find someone else without being rude.
Dumb?
Not
Bozo is pretty rude. A bozo is a clown. It's a clown. Call somebody a bozo, you mean you're a fucking clown. That's what bozo means. Okay? And yeah, I like that word, especially bozo-ness. Like, that's not something you're gonna hear every day, so that's interesting. I like that. All right, we're gonna put that in our inventory. That's one that I think we're gonna think about. I think there's at least one more bit of language in this quotation. That's super weird in this context.
Marinating.
Why do you say that?
I mean, I just don't hear it every day. I don't know.
Well, especially when you're talking about what?
It just
Like, what are we talking about here?
text.
Texting. You know, like when you marinate your text, what the hell are you talking about, right? Like, that's strange. So it's worth our attention. It's worth thinking about. Let's do that. You guys are unfrozen, by the way. All right. First thing we got to do is what we've been doing this whole time. Could somebody rather slowly read me with your chest that sentence, the like in text or whatever? Could somebody help me out?
the whole sentence.
Yes, sir. That last sentence.
In text,
Slow down. You're already too fast. In text.
your mistake just sits there marinating on the other person's screen, leaving a lasting.
Stop.
Leaving a lasting Indicative Elizabeth.
It's your, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yo, my fault.
Ineptitude and odious, he says. Okay, so when it comes to quotations, you quote for language. I can't say that enough. I'll probably say it too much though. The other thing to note is you only want that language. We've talked a little bit about quotation. We've kind of skirted around paraphrase. We're going to keep getting at that in different ways. But the reason you paraphrase is to save space. Because ideally, you need space to perform analysis. That's where you make your grade, is analysis. So if you pad your paper with long quotations or a bunch of quotations, you're not doing yourself any favors. You're hitting that length requirement, which is worth about 5 points of your total 100. But you're sacrificing opportunities for analysis, which is probably worth about 70 points. Now, this is a complete sentence. Some of you are under the misconception that you have to quote in complete sentences. You do not. That is not how that works. Okay? We only want the language that we really need. Before we're going to do that, we're going to think about the context. How do we, and again, we've done this already, but how do we lead to this quotation? How does Ansari get to this idea? What's he talking about before this?
He's talking about which is better.
Calling or texting.
Right.
And he kind of, and to get a little more specific, at the end here, he's talking about texting. And what about it? Like, he seems to be highlighting some issue. What's the issue he's highlighting? Do you think?
You get more embarrassed on text.
Presents more of an opportunity for embarrassment, maybe, in a certain way. Yeah? What's up?
You can't take back what you said, it's already, in words.
Good. Because again, when you're on the phone with somebody or when it's in person, if you say something and it comes out wrong or they took it the wrong way, they're going to react. You're going to see that, usually. And you can say, oh, wait, no, I didn't mean all Jews. You know, say like, you get my point. You say something and it comes out weird, or they interpret it a different way from how you meant it, and you can counter. But in text, it does kind of sit there marinating on their screen. There's no takesy backsies. So it's weirdly more permanent, maybe, or something? Is that kind of what we're talking about with texting? Okay. So something about okay. So what we're probably going to talk about, what we seem to be interested in when it comes to this quotation, specifically, is the permanent nature of texted mistakes, okay? Most texts aren't really mistakes. Most texts are nothing, right? Some of you are texting right now. What are you really saying? What do you want to have for breakfast? I like muffins. I prefer toast. Like it, conversations that never need to be had, right? Pointless. But occasionally, you'll make a mistake, and it just sits there on that. You can't get that screen. You can't go, wait, no, give me your phone. You don't need to see that. Like there's no, it's out of your control. We could even think about. And we've already mentioned that we like this, and we like this. And it kind of seems like, what's your name, sir?
Darius.
Darius. It kind of seems like Darius was also highlighting maybe even this, right? That lasting record. And again, that gets at that permanent sort of question. So for right now, we'll say that we want all three of those. We may not by the end, right? But for right now, we're just trying to figure this out. We want all three because we like them. What do we already not need? We can already cut one huge section of this sentence. Where is it?
Before the word marinate.
Yeah. We can cut all this if we want to. We don't need it. Now, we do need to have a complete sentence that makes sense. And if we were to make a cut like that, we would have to fix something, because these have to read together. It's that easy, right? I know I did that kind of fast. So just to reiterate what I'm talking about. We had context, we had the full quotation. We realized we don't need the full quotation. The first third, you can do that. Those are words you have available to you, right? If you want to quote the full sentence, you can, but I'm telling you right now, you're kind of wasting space. So a more sophisticated analyst, which I hope you all become, right, would say, well, lose that shit, quote this right here, and I'll just add a little bit. I'll basically sum up what he said, I'll paraphrase in my own words, and I'll lead into the quotation, right? You still get all the important parts, but now it's a little tighter. You look smarter when you do stuff like this, okay? You just look like you know more of what you're doing. Questions at this stage, because next is the hard part. Okay. The next thing we got to do is think about analysis. We're talking about rhetorical analysis specifically. And I keep saying it's not what Ansari says, although that is somewhat important. It's how he says it. And we already say in our context kind of what the main idea is, right? We got that out of the way already. So we know what the idea is. Let's start here. Marinating. What on earth? What does that even mean? Some of you probably don't know what that means. What does it mean to marinate? To sit in what? Like what? Because it's not normally texting, right? Like what are we talking about? We're talking about marinating. It's a cooking term, right? What's a marinade do?
Like you soak in.
Soaks in what? Sauce, juices, right? Yeah. And again, in cooking, if that's what this book were about, this would not be noteworthy. But in this context, it's a little weird. That means things are different, right? Now we're not talking about sauce or juices. Something soaks in its own juices, by the way, you're talking about like blood. It's delicious. Anyway, what is your text marinating in? Soaking in, right? Like soaking up all the...
Embarrassment.
Huh?
Embarrassment.
The dumb thing you said,
Yeah.
whatever it was, right? It's soaking in it. What does that do to you guys to think about it that way? Some dumb text you send, you didn't mean to say it that way, you didn't know they would interpret it that way. It's not just embarrassing, right? Because he could say that, and he probably does at some point. But it's marinating. How does that maybe alter the message a little bit, to put it that way? The dumb thing you said is just soaking in all of the sort of possible embarrassment you could have on that other person's screen. Sure.
It gets worse and worse, and you cannot take it back. So you just get more anxious as time goes on.
Okay. So again, it takes this main idea, and I guess I'll do this on this side of the board. But you would highlight the specific element you're talking about, by the way. And if we're going to start with marinating, which I would like for us to do, you just say, How did you say that again? This is us just pointing to this section of the quotation. But then, what was the point you made again?
I was just saying that there's nothing you can do about it, you cannot take it back, so you just feel more and more anxious as time goes on.
Like a marinade, like adds more flavor.
It just-
But in this case, the flavor is how dumb you look. Yeah, okay. To a marinade, implies that's the first sentence of our analysis of that quotation. Everything before the comma is just pointing to what we're talking about and how we're going to talk about it, right? He's comparing this to this idea. He's putting it that way. Well, what idea presents itself as a result of that comparison? Maybe this, that your embarrassment increases rather than decreases with time. For the bulk of human history, it's been pretty much the opposite. You get really embarrassed at first when you say the dumb thing. You worry about it for a little bit, and then it kind of goes away, right? But here, Ansari is arguing, it doesn't go anywhere. It's still on their screen. They can screenshot it. Keep in mind, this is on the opposite page, at least again, for those of you with the hard copy. This is on the opposite page from screenshots. He's talking about how permanent they are, and then he's showing you not just that someone screenshot this and put it online, but that he put it in a fucking book. Right? Somewhere out there is the idiot that said, I like your tits. Millions of people have bought this book. There, forever. Marinating. Right? It's kind of interesting. Let's muse on that a little bit. Can we take this any further? This embarrassment increase. It seems like you wanted to, Sam. You had another idea along with that. What issue maybe crops up as a result of that mounting embarrassment? You said it. I mean, I don't.
I just feel more anxious, it just gets worse and worse.
Okay, good. I mean, not good, but you take my point. I'm not going to write full sentences after this because let's be serious. But something to the effect of, your next sentence might be, that the anxiety you feel about talking to this person would work in the same way as a result of that mounting embarrassment, right? Just makes the situation worse. Okay. One other question we can think about, and you should, is why any of this matters, though. We've started some analysis, and by the way, we haven't even really touched on this stuff. We can come back to this if we want, okay? But for now, we're just dealing with this. Why do we care? And sometimes the answer is we don't, by the way. But I think here we do. Why does this idea matter to us? Do you think? Because, real quick, we're arguing that Ansari is presenting this idea to us by saying it this way, okay? Now what you have to do is say, here's why it matters. Here's why we care. Do we not? Again, that is a possible answer. I could be wrong. You guys don't care about this idea? Doesn't apply to you at all? Doesn't?
Because it brings it to the moment.
What's up?
Because it brings it to today's way of texting.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so it's certainly applicable, right? Sure. I guess to make my point in a different way, like, again, if we only quoted for ideas, we could find a quotation that would apply to us, right? What we're trying to argue is the way that he says it makes, kind of makes this point foreign. Like it makes it, you could argue, more applicable in some way. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, to bring all that back, I just said a lot to you. I'm gonna say it in one sentence, okay? Can you argue that Ansari saying that idea like this matters to you? And if so, how so? Some of you may not have known what marinade meant. If that's the case, you should have looked it up. But those of you who did that hit you in any kind of a way? Try to put that into words for me. This is the hard part. I said that at the start. This is the hard part because you're thinking now. But that's good. How does it affect you differently to say that your mistakes marinate on that other person's screen? Time out on you for just a second.
It makes you like, it makes you more embarrassed because they can just sit there and they like show people and.
Yeah. Well, so does it for some reason make you consider that possibility more?
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
You said it. Consider what possible?
The possibility that they have it now, that they could show people or they could look at it like anytime they want. Like, what about saying it's marinating, you could argue, makes you consider that possibility more?
They could screenshot it.
Yeah, but again, we're not talking about like the practical sort of what they could do. We're talking about what he says. We got to focus on that, okay? So when it comes to saying your mistakes marinate, what about putting it that way? You could argue, presents this idea in does it make it more powerful? Does it make it more comical? Like how does it work is what we're trying to say. Do you think?
The way he says it, it's like making it more powerful because some of that it shows that it shows that he's trying to say that that embarrassment that you did gave up. I mean, that embarrassment or whatever is you're soaking it in or whatever.
I'm with you to a point. We're very close. I agree. So can we're missing some language. And this is the hard part. We need language to talk about language, okay? But you say, I'm trying to remember your verbs because verbs are important. I don't want to give you guys the answer here. But something about those juices, right? Soaking in your mistake. Even to put it that way, 'cause I'm just describing what marinating is. How does that make this, according to what's your name, sir? You're Trey, right? Sweet, okay. I'm learning a little bit. It takes me some time. According to Trey, and according to me, it makes the message a little more powerful to say that your text sort of soaks in the juices of whatever dumb thing you said, right? Why does that make that message more powerful? This idea of embarrassment and anxiety, do you think? Okay. Let me give you another example. The last sentence of the first paragraph we looked at on 47, the thing about Sherry Turkle, one of the experts he talks to, she says this, same idea. She says, texting, unlike an in-person conversation, is not a forgiving medium for mistakes. That's this. That's the same thing, right? Ansari says it like this, Sherry Turkle says it like that. What I'm asking you is, number one, I'm assuming, and again, tell me if I'm wrong. You have to tell me how. But I'm willing to entertain it. What I'm assuming is, this is a little stronger, hits you in a different way. Maybe has you think about it more, it affects you emotionally perhaps, something to say it like this, as opposed to how Sherry Turkle says it, right? My question to you is, and you're unfrozen by the way, my question to you is why? Why saying it this way maybe even works better? potentially. Why, do you think? Because it's the same idea as Turkle there. What's he doing when he talks about, because he's not literally talking about marinating, right? Yeah.
Even though it's weird figure of language, it still fits the subject, and it puts the image in your brain.
It's an image. It's an image. That's powerful. Most of you, even now, which is amazing to me, best of luck with your scholastic career, are glazed over when we read Sherry Turkle's sentence, right? When we read it before. We got 2 sentences in, and I saw some of you just check out. I'm not, and you just, whatever you do in your brain other than this class, right? Because it's just words. It's the same idea, and if pressed, I think all of you could see that, okay? But again, what matters here is how it's said. And in this case, that's a hell of an image. We respond to images. Yeah? Some of you are on Instagram right now. We respond to images. They're powerful. Why? To have an image of your mistakes marinating on their screen. Why is that, you're going to argue, powerful, do you think? You can talk in my back. It's fine. Go right ahead. Don't even worry about it. I'll ask the opposite. Is it not more powerful to use an image? I don't think any of us would agree with that, right? Well, then that implies, generally we agree, the image here makes it more powerful somehow. I'm just wondering why that is. Why do you think giving us an image as a reader helps make the point? You're allowed to be wrong, by the way. I know some of you are just super scared you're going to be wrong for some reason. That's part of being a student, being wrong. No one tells you that. No one wants to take a shot. Oh, guys. Yes, sir.
Because it's just words.
What do you mean?
Like, it's just like words and not seeing the image.
I didn't, a little louder.
Like, it's just words like on the page, so that's something you just like seeing the image.
Well, why does an image, even your phrase, just words, right? Like it has a little stank on it. Why does an image offer us more than just words, right? I think we all understand that stank, right? Why is an image better? I'm agreeing with you. But why is that, do you think? Sure. No hand? No, you're good. Just be careful. No, you're good. A lot of you are doing this, and then you get real close and you're like, no. So I just... Well, baseline it. Are we all in agreement that an image usually is more powerful than just words? Okay. So we're in a safe place.
Is it because of the way they look at it?
The hell does that mean?
Like, okay, if a person looks at words rather than the picture, like the person, like we talked about earlier, that if, like, when we're looking at words or whatever, we're seeing, like, we're more looking like, what we're trying to figure out, like, who that person is or what the thing's about, pretty much. So if we're looking at a picture, it can show, like, more in depth of what, like, the person can look more at the details instead of what's in the words. That makes sense.
I think I follow what you're saying. I think. Okay. I'll be honest with you. I'm gonna write down what you said. But I get a picture of how some of your brains work the more you speak to me. The way your head works is you go to the second idea rather than the first, which is good. That probably means you're pretty intelligent. The problem is you got to give me that first one first, because you're skipping a step. You're going to freak people out. So what you're getting at, I think, you didn't say it this way because we speak differently. Where the hell am I going to write this? Is just, look, man, we're doing our best, right? You would say it differently in your paper, but I'm trying to sum it up, okay? Words can get in the way. And what do we mean by that? They're the primary means of communication that we have, right? We all understand that. But you know what you mean up here, implicitly. And when you say it, or when you text it, and you give it to someone else, we all understand they're going to interpret it with their brain. And most of the time, especially if it's a friend, somebody you know, they know how you are, they get you, they know what you mean. You know what I'm saying? Sometime today, you'll be talking to someone, you'll go, you know what I mean. And they'll go, oh yeah, right. You're kind of admitting, I didn't get it exactly right, but you know me well enough to fill in the blanks and figure it out like a puzzle, right? But sometimes, especially if it's someone you don't know as well, or whatever, maybe the message is out of the blue, and you just send something, and all they have is your words, that's where misinterpretation can come into play, right? You're not sure what they meant, and your brain fills it in. You figure it out. So words offer the opportunity for misinterpretation or less information, weirdly, right? Words are more specific in some way, but they also offer less information. You see what I mean? I think that's kind of what you're getting at. And what you're saying then, what Ansari is doing by invoking the image, we know exactly what he means because we can see it. You see what I'm saying? It's not like you can't ever misunderstand an image. That still happens, but it's harder to do because you can see it. There's less blanks to fill in. Is kind of what we're saying here. Fair? Okay. Does that make sense? That's one avenue to go down. And I want everyone to keep this in mind because I try to sell you on this pretty hard, because if you don't do this, best of luck. All we have talked about is this. We've been talking about this idea and that word. Really. It got us this. Eventually it got us to here. That's all we've been doing. Right? So again, in the darkness of your dorm rooms or whatever, when you're like, I don't want 2-3 pages, I can't do it, it's like because you're not doing this. Okay? This is a little more difficult, but that whole length requirement becomes way less of an issue. Okay? When you focus on specific details, you ask yourself the hard questions and you sit with them for a little bit. You can figure this out. Okay? Lastly, I know we're running out of time. We probably won't have time for topic sentences today. I know you're bummed out. But suffice to say this. When you arrive at an actual argument, okay, this is an actual rhetorical argument that you could think more about, but we got one, all right? Topic sentence is the first sentence of every body paragraph. You are just summing up the main idea of that body paragraph. Now, ideally, you should be making arguments in every body paragraph, like we're doing here, right? So that means every topic sentence should be an argument. You start your body paragraph with an argument, you give me evidence, specific evidence, that somehow helps me understand that, and then the rest of your body paragraph is you breaking down for me how that evidence proves that topic sentence. That's every body paragraph you write for me, okay? So you would write to this, you would see what else you would come up with. Maybe this is your main idea, you put that in the sentence at the top. Chances are good though, the more you think about this on the page, you're gonna arrive at something else a little more specific. So maybe that's your topic sentence. But this is a great start. The idea you kind of skipped, which again, usually is a marker of intelligence, so well done, but you gotta know about the holes in your analysis. Your issue might be, and some of you will run into this too, you'll skip steps. The easier idea here is simply the images are more powerful because we can see them. You see what I'm saying? Like, I know that sounds super basic because it kind of is, but it's also true. And that's why I say it's a first idea rather than a second idea.
I can see what you're saying. Because I was-
Right.
I think that's the idea I was trying to get to, I just didn't know how to say it right.
Well, because again, it's one of those, I mean, to bring it full circle, I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, I guess I'd be okay with it, but I think you could do better. I wouldn't want anyone to end on an idea, if you could help it, like images are more powerful because we can see them. Because again, what kind of argument is that?
Oh,
Banal. We all know that. I said it, and you're all like, yeah, sure. But it's a start. It is an argument. And the idea is you have to try to go further. And maybe you end up somewhere like here. Maybe you end up somewhere different. Okay? There's different ways to take this. We don't have time, and I know you don't care. But you can start with that first idea, and if you keep writing, you can usually end up at a second, a little more specific, more nuanced, better idea. Okay? This is what we're after, though. How is, not what Ansari's saying, but how he's saying it, working on you? Specifically, in your quotation. In this one, is the image that he gives you, okay? Plenty of quotations in the book that don't work this way, right? That's how you know you're headed in a good direction, because you're specifically talking about this. You follow? Questions about any of that? For next time, you have Ansari, chapter 3. This is the much hyped chapter where you don't have to read all of it, okay? So pay attention to those page numbers on the syllabus. I also sent you an email, I think it was last week, where I told you like where you can start chapter 3 if you're using the ebook. You can find that in your inbox. But it's like 20 pages or so of chapter 3 you don't have to read. I would highly recommend not doing that, right? Like, we could all get behind a little less work. But that's on the syllabus for you. It's in your inbox. Homework-wise, 2 responses to the discussion post, okay? Respond to your classmates. We're trying to kind of, it's not like I was asking this of you on the discussion post. I wanted you to sort of try, see what you could do, right? We're just trying to figure this all out. But respond to each other now. Hopefully we have a little better idea of what we're trying to do. Go back and look at other people's work and say, oh, with what you're talking about, maybe you have a second idea for that person they didn't see, type of thing. We're going to help each other. This is all practice. Also, you have a close reading assignment due. Those 2 responses will take you 10 minutes, right? Close reading is this. That's what this is. For your homework, the main thing I'm worried about, I want you to try this. A quotation or 2, if you need to do 2, that's fine. But I want you to really try to take this on. A specific detail from Ansari. It could be an image, in words. By the way, it could be an image in, like he gives us screenshots, right? He gives us graphs, all kinds of stuff in this book. I want you to focus on one specific thing, or 2, okay? And see how far you can get. Try to get at something like this, okay? That's your homework for next time. All right, thank you guys. I'll see you Wednesday.